Hi, my name is Stanley Onyebuchi. I'm here to take you on Introduction to Genetics. Introduction to Genetics. Before we proceed, let's look at the objective of our study today. Number one, we are going to talk about the concept of genetics. Two, we are going to talk about the father of genetics, that is Gringo Mendel. Three, we are going to talk about the modern branches of genetics. And four, we are going to talk about the terminologies in genetics, Now let's move up to what is genetics. What is genetics? By definition, genetics is the study of heredity and variation of inherited character. The study of heredity and variation of inherited character. Now we have, in genetics, we try to study how traits or characteristics are passed from parents to their offsprings, These traits or characters are encoded in what we know as the DNA or the DNA molecules, which is the carrier of genetic information. DNA is a carrier of genetic information. Now, how an organism is constructed, how an organism operates, all is encoded in the DNA. So every living thing on earth has DNA in its cells. That is genetics. Now, in that definition, you mark two words: heredity and variation. Heredity and variation. Now, what is heredity? Heredity is a tendency of offspring to resemble their parents. Or, we said, heredity is a process of passing the traits and characteristics from parents to offsprings. The offspring cells get their features and characteristics via genetic information from either the mother or the father. Also, we say that heredity and genetics are the reason you look so much like your parents. So we say that genetics is a branch of science that studies the genes, genetic variation, and heredity in living organisms. Now, the second word there is variation. What is variation? You sometimes would like to ask some of these questions, like what causes the differences between sisters and brothers of the same species? What causes the differences between the sister and a brother of the same parent? That is variation of the same species. So variation is a tendency of offsprings to vary from their parents. The tendency of offsprings to vary from their parents. That is variation. So the differences in characteristics between these individuals of the same species is what we know as variation in genetics. Now, I would like to let you know about two forms of variation. Some variation is passed on from parents to offspring via gene during reproduction. This is what we call inherited variation. Those variation that occurs at the point of reproduction via genes is called inherited variation. While variations that result as the differences in the surroundings or what an individual does, this type of variation is called environmental variation. It's called environmental variation. Look at the example of variation on the screen there. Look at the variation elephant. Look at people of the same family. You see the differences in height. Look at the differences in color, but of the same species. So this is what we call variation. This is what we call variation. Okay, let's move on to the next one. We are going to talk about the modern branches of genetics. Modern branches of genetics. One, cytogenetics. What is cytogenetics? Cytogenetics is a study of the structures of chromosomes materials. The structures of chromosome material. The study of the structure of the chromosome materials. Chromosomes are genetic structures of cells. They contain the DNA. And what are the functions? They carry inherited character or traits. They carry the organization of the cell's life. Of the cell's life. Now, number two, molecular genetics. What is molecular genetics? Molecular genetics is a branch of genetics that investigates the chemical and the physical nature of genes and the mechanism by which genes control development, growth, and physiology. Now, the next one we're going to talk about is the phylogenetics. What do we mean by phylogenetics? Phylogenetics is the study of the evolutionary history and relationship among individuals or groups of organisms. In fact, this study tends to find out the species that descended from a common ancestor. Species that descended from a common ancestor. Now, the next one we are going to talk about is developmental genetics. Developmental genetics. What do we mean by developmental genetics? Developmental genetics is the study of how genes control the growth and development of an organism throughout its life cycle. Throughout a life cycle. You know that the function of the gene is to pass on the information necessary to build proteins, bodies, from one generation to another. Take, for example, a newly fertilized egg cell has a collection of genes, and in that gene contains all the necessary information needed to transform it from a single cell into an embryo and then to an adult stage. This process of changes of a single cell into a new person is called development. Now, the next one we're going to talk about is behavioral genetics. What is behavioral genetics? Behavioral genetics is a study of variation in behavior as it is affected by gene, which are the units of heredity passed down from our parents to the offspring. And also, scientists have discovered that genes by themselves do not control behavior. Genes by themselves do not control behavior. Genes enables organisms to respond to and use what is in the environment and at the same time. At the same time, environment also influences the action of gene. So we may be confused. Sometimes the term environment is confusing. We may think it's a physical environment. No, we are talking about in genetics, environment means all influences other than the inherited factors. All influences other than the inherited factor. So typically, we have about two environmental factors that can affect the behavior of an individual. One is the social world, and which we call the external. This includes your family and your friends, your home and your working place. Specific experiences from everyday life can also affect the behavior of someone. That one, we call it a social world, which is external. Number two, which is the last, we have biological world. This one is internal. We talk about the nutrients, we talk about the hormones, the viruses, the bacteria, the toxins. In fact, the product that individuals use during the prenatal development and throughout their life can equally affect the behavior of an individual. Thank you for paying attention to this introductory part of genetics. By next contact, we are going to go more deeper. Thank you.